I'm JD Allen, and I make radio for a living and podcasts, and that's where my passion lies. I'm also the education chair for this great group at PCLI, so I work a lot with a lot of our emerging journalists that will hopefully be watching this video either now or at a later time. But I want to start talking with some of our wonderful panelists like Carolyn James. She's the editor and publisher of 3 weekly newspapers, the Amityville Record, Babylon Beacon, and the Massapequa Post. My first byline was with Carolyn, so I have definitely a love for her publications. But Carolyn also serves as the FOI committee chair in New York for SPJ and for the Press Club of Long Island. So, Carolyn, what gives us the right to be so nosy? What kind of laws are in place that allow us to make these public information requests in the first place?
Well, really, government is responsive to us. We are the government, and we really should know what's going on and have the information we need to live our lives and do the kind of things that we need to do, as well as being reporters, being able to report the information that our readers need. So it's an inherent right, the right to information, and uh, beginning probably in the 70s, we started having laws to help ensure that that, in fact, is what takes place in our local governments.
And also with us is Tim Bolger. He's the editor-in-chief of both the Long Island Press and Dan's papers, as well as Charles Lane, who works with me at WSHU. Hey, guys.
Hey there.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So all four of us, are going to be chatting about our experiences with public information, really where the origin comes from, what kind of progress that we've seen in recent years, and what challenges we still encounter in making public information requests. To kind of, I guess, set where we're at, Tim, back in 2017, we'll use this as our benchmark to look at. The Long Island Press and PCLI put out a report card system of over nearly 200 localities on how responsive they were to open records requests. Generally, how responsive are Long Island municipalities in responding?
So the cumulative grade for all of those agencies was a C. So, they passed, but not exactly, going to be moving on to a better university if they were a high school student. It was mixed results at best. I was just looking over some of it last night, and just to refamiliarize myself with it because it's been a little while, and there were definitely some egregious, people just blatantly ignoring requests repeatedly and giving us the runaround, and then there were the stars in the group that just immediately respond with the information, and so it's really dependent upon the municipality.
And Tim, what kind of things can anybody ask for in terms of public information?
So the big picture is anything that is documented. What you can't ask for is, just general information that may not be recorded. A memo or an email or an audit, things like that, if to be something that's been documented by that agency.
Tim's having some mic problems. Tim, if you can hear me, I'm going to have Carolyn Bailey out. Carolyn, what kind of exceptions are there to the rule in which, Tim was saying anything that's nailed down, a document that exists that has holds a record of something, what can't I ask for?
Well, according to some government officials, there's really a lot you can't ask for. But according to the law, there's really not that much that you can ask for. There's a certain amount of privacy even for public officials. Juveniles' names with regard to police documents are not available. although generally within the community, if a juvenile is arrested, everyone knows who they are anyway. So, there are just anything relative to, for example, if a municipality is in negotiations for purchasing property, they want to purchase some parkland. Those negotiations are, and I think rightfully so, not subject to the FOIA law, because the belief is that it would then inflate the costs to the municipality for those kind of things. But beyond that, there's really relatively not much that's not accessible. It's just getting through to the right people and explaining the law to them and making sure that they comply.
And so, Carolyn, is it that there's just a lack of teeth in at least state law on lack of teeth in the state law, or and lack of education on the part of officials in being able to comply with it? Like, what are the road bumps here?
Well, it's a combination of things. Some public officials don't want to give up information. They don't feel that, it's a productive thing for them to do. A lot of it has to do with the fact that the uh, public information officers are not well trained or not trained enough. Some municipalities file everything through their attorneys, which is ridiculous. It adds to the cost of their compliance. And generally, the attorneys are, don't follow the law themselves. They're, you've seen those documents where everything is blacked out. So it's a combination of things that cause issues. I would say primarily a lack of education on the part of the people who are responsible for complying for those requests.
Charles, I know that you file a lot of FOIL requests, and my where I got a lot of experience with freedom of information was actually reporting on a lot of agriculture and land use, and so I would spend time in town halls going through planning and building information from developers and the municipal planning and zoning process. And most of the folks around me were not journalists. They were, other business people. They were contractors. This is not something that's just built for us journalists, but our, we do get a lot of, we call attention to it a lot ourselves. Mm-hmm. So what kind of stuff have you encountered, Charles?
I've actually had the pleasure of, and I suggest that everybody do this eventually, is to foil the FOIL logs. It's absolutely fascinating what other people are looking at. And by and large, with something like a police department, the insurance companies far outnumber the journalists. So it's like journalists are maybe like 10% of all the press. It's insurance companies foiling everything else. If you go to something like a smaller, like a school district or a fire department, or I don't know, some agency, maybe even like a county purchasing office or something like that, the most frequent users are competitors. Somebody selling some sort of uniform service, or somebody selling something. What they're doing is they're foiling their competitors' bids and then trying to outbid them in some maneuver or something like that. And then you just have a lot of people, they want a stop sign in a certain neighborhood and they want to find out how many traffic accidents were there. It's a lot of stuff like that. Unfortunately, I think journalists are filing fewer and fewer public records requests, and I think that's sort of creating a circular problem that we have, at least on Long Island.
And do you think that the response, there's fewer reporters reaching out, which means that the folks that we typically interact with are either freedom of information officers, or more general public information officers, or sometimes a media relations person that has some knowledge of the public records process. Do you think that, or have you seen that the interaction between journalists and these different managers of public information has gotten worse or changed? And I guess anybody can kind of come into that question.
I actually have a more rosy picture of sort of your quotidian records access officer. I think by and large, FOIL works. It's not great, but if you're going to school districts, if you're going to, I keep on saying fire departments because I'm doing that recently, but they're slow. They often don't know the law. You have to educate them, but like they're not overtly obstructing you. I think we have, at least on Long Island, a handful of extremely problematic agencies that intentionally withhold records for very speculative reasons. I think it's just outright. And so when we talk about the problems with FOIL, I think, Committee on Open Government, they're understaffed and they're not very, they can't really help you a lot. But sort of the main problem is the clawback mechanism, the legal fees provision. So theoretically, if you encounter a problematic agency that refuses to give records, even though the law says they should, you're basically encountering a $20,000 paywall in order to get the records. Famously, the Nassau County Police Commissioner, Patrick Ryder, paid $17,000 to withhold his calendar. To me, so when there's an education issue with the smaller agencies, and then there's just the obstruction with the larger agencies. I will say that I've had to send some records requests off to Florida agencies recently. Night and day, absolutely night and day. It's like they bend over backwards to get you everything and then more as quickly as possible. And the reason is a fee position. Like lawyers can make money if agencies mess around with it. So.
Yeah, I've had just personally, unless it's small local town government, I've had more success foiling or FOIA-ing states in Massachusetts, Vermont, and Connecticut in comparison to New York, but that's a sample size of one here. So, Tim, when I cut you off last time, you were telling us about this report card. I kind of want to spring forward and maybe speculate a little bit. The impact of COVID on at least transparency and visibility has changed, or slightly when it comes to elected offices and our government. You can now watch a lot of public meetings that happen over Zoom like this. And so presumably there's been more access to information than ever before. Are you finding that the public records information is any more obtainable?
The FOILs that I've filed since that report and since COVID, I can't say I've noticed anybody, being extra fast. I know there were some agencies that did implement after that, and that was good to see. But I can't say that those agencies specifically are the ones that I've foiled in that time. So you still have agencies that run out the clock. They wait the full 20 days when well that they have that just sitting on their laptop or their computer, and they can just send it that day if they wanted to, but they prefer to make you wait. So it's I can't say we've come like leaps and bounds forward, and like without doing a full redo of the report, it's tough to say whether or not that C grade has really gone up or down. One thing that did jump out at me though in the middle of the craziness of COVID though was I remember it was Sunshine Week, just when things were getting crazy, and then that was the same week that the FBI decided they were going to stop operating their FOIA room, where they like proactively put out documents that they know people commonly FOIA, and I haven't double checked to see if they ever reversed that and went and put it back, but it was just an interesting thing to see that, like, while everybody was distracted by COVID, there was like a prime example of a leading federal agency pulling back something that was proactive in releasing records that, so people didn't have to file records requests to get them. So, that's probably I don't know how deep that anecdote goes across local agencies though, but it certainly didn't take it as a good sign.
So, Carolyn, let's kind of shift some of this, because I'm sure our horror stories are going to be filtered throughout this. So, how do we do this better? How do us journalists know the law, know how to use the law, and know how to really make a good request, and then hold that request to the feet of whoever we're trying to get? So, like, what is the step one?
Step one is filing the FOIL request.
So what does that mean? It means I have to know exactly what I'm looking for, right?
Not necessarily. You can say documents that contain whatever information it is that you're looking for if you don't know exactly. If if you're working in an area and you know the people, I mean, there's nothing wrong with calling up and saying to the Public Information Office or the FOIL office, this is what I'm looking for. What documents would that information be contained in? And they can help you do that, and they can help you tailor your Freedom of Information form so that they can activate it and get it done in a timely manner. So that's the first thing. Develop a relationship with the people that handle the documents within your area. That's very helpful.
Right. It doesn't have to be immediately adversarial. There are
No,
people presumably working in these departments and can tell you, hey,
and they
look,
want to
you
do a
might
good
want to
job,
ask for this or not that.
and they want to be responsive. Most of them do want to be responsive, except for the Nassau County Police Department, but that's another story. So, so that's the first thing. You just call up. If you don't know where the information is contained, then you call up, you find out, and they may be able to help you. You try to formulate a logical Freedom of Information form. You can go online, you can look up the wording of it, and now you can do it now through email. I always request the document in electronic form, so we don't have to pay for them if they are available, and that's part of your request. And if you don't hear from them within the 5 or 6 days, you call up and you send another email. What happened to my request? What's the status of it? And how can you help me get this information? So, we like to think we're very progressive here in New York. And in fact, the law, when it was first established in the 70s, it was progressive, as we talked about, in a couple of ways. It predicted the fact that municipalities and government agencies were going to be using the computer and putting their documents online. And as a result, New York's law did not have to be written when documents were in fact done that way. And it also predicted that some of these municipalities and governments would farm out the care and storage of their documents to private entities. And New York's law, in fact, did state that regardless of where or how they were kept, that they still would be open to the public records law. So in that respect, we like to think of ourselves as progressive. But when you look at some of the state laws across the country, we really have fallen behind. I think Charles mentioned the fact that, attorneys are not eager to take on these cases because if the plaintiff wins, there's no requirement that the legal fees are paid for, by the defendant or the municipality. The municipality has nothing to lose by denying you and being, taxpayers pay for the attorney fees on their part. On the other side, the plaintiff, it's a civic association or a small newspaper or even a larger newspaper that has to expend sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars to fight these cases. And in New York, we really have to change the law to ensure that that they don't have that advantage, that they are going to have to pay financially for ignoring or sidestepping New York State's law. So that's one of the major things we really have to do here in New York to, to make the Freedom of Information law effective. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's my answer.
And more. But so you mentioned filling out this this electronic form. Some towns or villages or other places, you can find there might be a place on their town portal that you can fill out a freedom of information request that might be detailed towards whether or not you're looking for commercial or other kinds of property information or different information within their departments. You might have to send a good old-fashioned email. And Carolyn, you had mentioned that there are places online. I think Charles, you had mentioned the open the New York committee. Yeah, can you talk about Carolyn and if Charles and Tim, if you want to weigh in, you're more welcome.
I think it's COOG.com. Go on there and you can actually download or just copy the form. One of the other things I think it's important to note is that sometimes when you go, the municipality or the public information officer will say, oh, that form's not good. You have to fill out our form, and they hand you a form. Well, then you have a decision to make. You just don't want to start an argument. It's not inconvenient just to fill out their form and make them happy. You do it. But that's not a requirement. You are not required to fill out a form developed by the government entity. An email is sufficient, to do that. So you have to pick your fights. And that's one fight I don't pick. I fill out their fancy form.
There's some planning meetings that I've been at where where I've shown up and I've gone to the planning office and filled out a physical sheet, and then they went into the back for an hour and got together all the materials and brought me out a milk crate full of material for me to sift through. So things might come in different forms. Tim, did you want to add to that? I think Charles is on deck.
I totally agree, but it is a and not legally sound requirement that these agencies will sometimes make you fill out their own form. But yeah, you got to pick your battles, because it's just gonna drag out the response time if you fight that fight. And the other thing I would suggest too, though, is like we just see FOIL as like a tool to do our jobs, but a lot of times the people on the receiving end of it see it as like this like adversarial, like we're like attacking them. And like there was one story I did years ago where like I just like sent out like a blast of before the audit, just like blasted like the same FOIL to like 13 different government agencies, and I was just trying to get a complete picture of the story I was researching. But like what I found was like after I started like contacting the people involved along the way, like they were all like taken by it, and like it helps to reach out and see what you could get without filing a FOIL request before you go and file a FOIL, because you sometimes ruffle feathers when you do it without making an introduction first, and it helps in the long way, because ultimately we're just trying to get information. So if you piss people off right away by even if it's not really something that people should be mad about, you're just exercising your rights, it doesn't help you do your job at the end of the day. So just my 2 cents.
Yeah, there's been plenty of times where just a phone call or an email saying, hey, I'm looking for this info. I was trying to fill out a FOIL request, and I hope you can help me. And I've gotten, oh, here's what you're looking for. And we just skipped the entire process because it's paperwork. It's a timeline. I've got to keep track of it. You've got to keep track of it. And sometimes you're able to find what you're looking for much quicker than actually getting to the process itself. But Charles and Tim, like, you said 13 requests that you sent out there. We sent out about 200 for that audit. Charles, you've got a spreadsheet full of them. So how do you keep track of it all? Like, what are some best practices that once you've got a lot of FOIL requests, and that is your way of investigation, how do you make sense of it all? What kind of tips could you give?
Well, if I could just, on the back of what Carolyn and Tim were saying, I wanted to add one of the most inspirational anecdotes I've ever seen. I used to sit next to Rick Brand, just an incredible reporter for Newsday years ago. And we were at the legislature, and there's a slide deck or something, and he wanted the copy of the slide deck, and so he asked for it. And this is the thing that I think a lot of people don't get. There's political ramifications for giving information in government circles. And so the PIO at the time was like, I can't just give it to you, you have to foil it. And so Rick just whipped open his book and he said, I foiled the thing in your hand. I think it was like, I foiled the thing in your hand, ripped it off and handed it to her. And but she needed that foil in order to give the information. And I that sort of set the stage for how I think about foil going forward. This is, I do it as quickly as possible, just put them out. So in that vein, I do about 100 to 200 foil requests a year, and I keep track of them all in a Google spreadsheet. And I talked about R earlier. I am very good with data, but just tracking them as simply as possible, any method you have. But you have to, one of the things that I found is you have to nag the agency. I do it every about 30 days, because I think Tim had said this earlier, their plan is to just like, oh, he'll forget about it. And I think it's true, because most of us operate on the attention span of a stoplight, unfortunately.
And deadlines.
And so that's, and just to sort of compare, like, so how I shifted from Rick Brand's mentality of he needed it right away to how I sort of operate now is like, I launch foils like I launch satellites, like I put them out there. And I think my average time is probably like 120, 150 days. They eventually come back, but stick around. I think my story's pretty good coming up. But like being able to not let the agency forget that you are still wanting this information. So asking them every 30 days, and with a spreadsheet, it's easy to have to click the day over to the next month, and it'll automatically remind you. But yeah, so I just use a normal spreadsheet. There's Muckrock, iFoya, Foya Machine. I'm probably forgetting some other ones, but there's lots of online systems that could help you in this regard too.
So, Carolyn, you had mentioned already some ways that we as journalists can do better FOIL-wise. You mentioned at the top that being a part of a group like SPJ and PCLI and advocating for better state laws around freedom of information is a step you can take. Building a rapport with the public information officers to know what you're asking for and finding out, building an expectation with them in terms of for what you're asking, turning to resources from SPJ and from the state open committees, open government committee, going to them for help. What are some other things that we can do to send better requests and hold them accountable?
Well, we could do things like Tim did. We can do studies and report on them. The New York Coalition for Open Government did a study, for example, in 222, a survey, which showed that 72% of towns in the state were not posting their documents online, 25% were not posting their minutes, 65% of county boards of election did not respond to emails or telephone calls for seeking information. So, we have the power of the pen, and that's, we can do those studies, report on those incidents, let our readers know when we filed for information and that it was denied. Get the public on our side in terms of that, the general public. Work with civic organizations to help them. They're hardworking volunteers, many of them who are trying to get a handle on development that's going up within their community, and they can't get the information. Although I've seen they become much more sophisticated over the years, right, Charles? I mean, just the numbers alone that you talk about in terms of who is filing shows how really the law has become commonplace in our community. So that's wonderful. So hold them accountable in our publications. I do that all the time. If I don't get the information I need, I do the best I can, and I clearly indicate in the story that we made this request, that 30 days has passed, we haven't, and they have not responded. Hold their feet to the fire and hold them accountable. Unfortunately, we're working with a law in New York State that is very weak and does not hold municipalities, public officials accountable for violating the law. It's no good to have a law if you have no enforcement. And essentially, we have no enforcement in New York State. And when you take them to court, they have nothing to lose.
So, Tim, as another editor, I guess how could journalists in the room who are filing freedom of information maybe pitch to their editors on when public records, the process of public records, becomes the story itself? Like, what advice would you give to a reporter who says, well, the inability to get this information is the story, or any of the other things that can happen along the way?
Well, if you're asking for something that is, clearly a public record, like undeniably, independently verifiably a public record, and they're denying it, and like all these other examples we're talking about, that they're just daring you to take them to court to force you to spend all this money to get that information. I see cases like that go to court all the time, but not always get reported on until that final resolution where the reporters finally get the documents. So I think like Carolyn said, actually reporting that this information is being withheld is perfectly newsworthy. I would say it's got to be more of a story if it's something especially egregious, like they're withholding something blatantly obvious, like their payroll. Like you can pretty much find that stuff online anyway. Like, why would you even withhold that? But as far as like timeliness goes, I mean, Sunshine Week was what we hooked the report card to, which I'm sure everybody on this call is probably well aware of, the annual celebration of open records nationwide. Another idea I'd heard recently as a suggestion for ways to do pieces about open records access itself was the anniversary of when New York State FOIA law passed. So, which is an idea worth considering. I think if you're looking, if your project didn't come together in time for the second week of March, then figure out what the anniversary of FOIA law passaging was, and maybe use that as your timestamp.
So another of the roadblocks that we've talked about is finding guidance. The state open government committee is helpful, but not always timely or able to do what they need to. Charles, tell me what the Institute for Access to Public Information is.
Well, it was an experiment to try to sue a number of agencies for not complying with FOIL. Unfortunately, I don't think we can withstand the burden of the legal expenses. As we talked about, the fee shifting provision in New York is just not viable. So I'm not quite sure we can have lawyers on staff doing that anymore. But one of the interesting things that I've discovered recently is a law clinic out of Buffalo, where they put together a pro se Article 78 guide. And it's very good. Actually, I just filed my first pro se lawsuit last week or the week before. And I, given the current status of the fee shifting provision in FOIL, I think the best chance that we have for sort of combating these troublesome agencies is to lower the cost of filing an Article 78 to about $500. and go in without a lawyer and then force the county attorneys or town attorneys, whatever they are, to respond in that vein. But as far as the Institute, I don't think we're going to make it. It's just, we can't have lawyers on staff doing basically free work with no compensation.
Hmm. I'm sorry to hear that. So I'm sorry, Carolyn. It was an institute that you were involved with that was trying to help the public gain access to government records on Long Island, but it sounds like it was a steep battle.
One of the things that so we had success in 2 cases and we got fees in 2 cases, but the problem is, particularly with the Nassau County Police Department, is they can absorb whatever fees they lose on, and then we end up having to take the other cases to appeal, which is like a 3-year process. So we have, I think, 3 in appeal right now. And that's kind of a big deal to lose in county court and then go to the next step up. And I get a sort of a front row seat in it, and it's very serious. Like, there's a lot of decorum involved, and if you step outside that decorum, they get kind of upset. So just the weight of having to take a case in the Nassau County Police Department in particular is going to make you do that for what I would consider mundane records. They're just not going to give them over, knowing that it's going to cost 3 years and tens of thousands of dollars to do it.
So we're going to have questions from the audience in a moment. If you're trying to quickly Google search something to help yourself out with one of your questions, you could also open up our new website at pcli.org, and you can see some of the upcoming panels that Brendan mentioned in the beginning. More info about upcoming award results might be coming soon, especially Hall of Fame and scholarships next month, and more information about the awards that are coming up at the end of the spring. Carolyn, just to help folks that have questions, you can start by putting questions in the chat, or you can unmute yourself in a moment and ask them yourselves. But Carolyn, you're a journalism teacher at Hofstra, and I teach at Stony Brook. And so we're involved with a lot of young people who are trying to wrap their heads around public information. I guess, how do you introduce public information at an early stage of something that is a tool that they can use from day one? What advice do you give to your students?
Well, we usually introduce that in the first news writing class that they take, outlining the laws and actually giving them exercises in filing freedom of information forms. One of the funny things is, some of the young people today have a difficult time actually getting on the telephone and making a telephone call to get the information. So part of the class involves practicing how to do that. And just to overcome that, that fear that some of them have. So outlining the law is one of them, but more than outlining the law, getting them into filing the forms, going through the process, navigating, dealing with public information officers, and just getting that experience, which I think is very important.
All right. Anybody have questions for our wonderful panel?
Yeah, JD, I do have one that maybe Charles could take. I actually was doing a FOIL round recently regarding police records, specifically police discipline records. In light of 50A being repealed, this is supposed to be something that we could get under FOIL, and the law seems to have been interpreted narrowly in that it's only substantiated complaints about police officers that the public is able to obtain, even though my impression is that the original intent of the law is any complaint against a police officer is a public document, but the courts have interpreted that narrowly so far. But at least that was something. If they investigate a complaint against a police reporter, against a police officer, and they determine that it is a complaint with merit and they discipline that officer, we get to see what that complaint is. Or maybe we don't, because I just went through this and I got a response from one department where I said, okay, thanks for giving me the disciplinary files about the outcome of the discipline for these various officers. I'd like to see the underlying complaints that led to this discipline. And rather than handing over the complaints, I was told, we don't identify people who made complaints. They didn't cite a law for why they were withholding this. They just said, we don't do it. And they said, the complaints mention other people. Some of the complaints are hearsay, and some of the complaints contain allegations that are unfounded. I would think that if it's a case of a complaint being partially founded and partially unfounded, the founded complaints are still subject to FOIL, and those should be released to me. But it's so frustrating that the police, and once one department does it, they all copy each other. They move the goalposts and they find new loopholes and new ways to say, you're not entitled to this thing that the courts have already said you are entitled to. Do you run into that frustration, Charles? Do I just need to keep pushing harder?
Well, the problem is where you live or where you ride. So it has to do with the department, the judicial department. Long Island, the second department, the judicial district for Long Island, the appellate court said, excuse me, the appellate court said that no substantiated complaints aren't necessary, or they don't have to give them over. But we've seen in the first department, and I don't know all the departments upstate, I apologize, but we're just sort of waiting on these courts. NYCLU just won up in Rochester, but that just applies to that department. When we're going to see a decision in the second department well, we don't know. But I think I totally get your frustration, because when 58 first was passed, there was, especially on the East End where you're at, you started to get records. And then what happened was the NYCLU sued and lost. And because of that, everybody shut down on Long Island. And so you probably know better than I, the police departments that actually gave over records. But I think I foiled after you did, the Southampton police, and they said no. It was because of that one decision. And so we're going to have to, my guess is we're going to have to wait for the Court of Appeals to either to overrule these, the second department and whatever department's upstate that I forget, or we're going to have to wait for new legislation, and that becomes a political question. I don't think the political atmosphere is going to shift back the way it was back in 2021 for another couple of years. So I think the way it is now is going to be the way it's going to be for several years. I think the problem you ran into with getting the complainant information is privacy. I have encountered this. I can't remember in which context I've it was I saw it. I actually got this this denial in the first department. I asked the AG's office for this information, and they denied it on privacy. And I didn't really fight it, because I think it's somewhat legitimate. When people are making a complaint against the police department, I think they have. I rationalize in my head that they may not want to face the reprisal that may come with making such a complaint. I'm not. I wasn't going to fight that fight. But lawyers fight all sorts of fights. But unfortunately, it's just Long Island. It's the second department. I've heard legal complaints that the NYCLU did that case bad, but I'm not a lawyer. I don't know. Yeah, unfortunately, just the second department.
Shoshana, did you have a question?
I don't know if I have a question, just an observation. Because I was a municipal records clerk a lifetime ago before I became a news editor. And I remember just being in that world, being subjected to not so much news media, but the average citizen, sometimes unhappy, troubled people, deliberately flooding the office with erroneous and repetitive requests that can make that. And so I try to remember that world when I make my own request today. Much like Carolyn said, you be courteous, you be polite, you you treat the clerks handling your requests like people, and your requests are going to go further. And I just felt the need to make that observation.
No, thank you for that. Being human is always important. I appreciate that.
It's actually a really good tactic. I just successfully got some documents recently because I appealed. It was kind of BS. They said it would take like 120 days or something like that. So I just appealed saying it was unreasonable, but I was just, incredibly polite in the appeal. And I think, they denied the appeal, but then gave me the records on the same day. So I think I bumped to the front of the line just by being able to be nice, just prove that I'm a nice person. So it's a very good tactic to just be nice all the time.
Yeah.
Cecilia. Oh, sorry, Tim, jump in.
No, I was just agreeing. Just always be nice to the gatekeepers. That is your key.
Cecilia, it looks like you're out in the field still. Do you want to ask your question, or is it?
I'm just wondering what you guys deem as your most successful, freedom of information document. Anything that shocked you, led to reform, explosive information. Just curious.
I don't know if it's explosive, but I was getting spun by an ADA, not an ADA, but a DA's political assistant. That his district attorney's office had the best statistics in terms of minority representation. Like, I think he talked to me for like 20 minutes without taking a breath, and so I foiled his actual stats, and they were miserable. So we did a story on it. And I've done. I recently did a story on the Nassau County jails, and I followed a bunch of stuff, and it's kind of funny how it works sometimes. It's like once you get the information, it opens the door to other information, and so we probably waited like 2 months for the information to come back, and we never put it in the story, like, because once we got the information and we were able to ask more intelligent questions, like other things just opened up that were far more interesting, that were far more leading. And so, and I think, and this is you're in TV, so like you sort of have the same problem. It's like documents are just not, they just don't play well on the radio or on TV. And so it's like even if you do get a lot of the documents, you're probably not going to lead with it because you've just got a stupid graphic of a document on the screen, right? But it's like, that's the trick of our job, is to being able to humanize the information. But I'm sure other people have far more explosive documents than I do.
Tim, Carolyn, take our victory lap. What'd you get that you're proud of?
I think that, in fact, that's the funny thing about FOIL. 99% of what you get is not going to be shocking. No, it's basic information that it's only the politicians that believe that all of this information is so shocking. It's just basic information that you need to flesh out a story or make it more interesting or get a greater understanding of what's going on in government. I really can't think of a document that I got that really shocked me. I just want to talk a little bit about what Charles was saying about the police complaints. And I do agree that in some sense, there is an element of privacy related to the people who make the reports against police officers. And that's probably something that I and probably most of my reporters friends would respect. There's a limit, as to what should be made public and what, where the public's right to know ends and privacy begins.
For me, the one that comes to my mind was I don't want to say the wrong village name, so I'm not going to name the village, but it was during that audit. There was one village, it was on the Gold Coast. I do remember that much. That part of the metrics that we were grading the municipalities on was if they overcharged us for records, because you're only supposed to be able to charge 25 cents per page. And in like some extreme circumstance, if it takes you like hours and hours to dig out these records, then they can charge you like whatever the rate of digging that information out is. But nothing we were asking for was especially time consuming. It was like just like general, easily available documents. So we've foiled, one of the things we foiled from everybody was their payroll records, which, you know, should be easy to share. This one village charged us, I think it was $150 just to email us an Excel sheet of their payroll records, which was like easily bragging among the most egregious like abuses of FOIL that, you know, in that this was probably others that rank it almost as bad in the audit if I were to go through it with a fine-tooth comb, but that one really stuck out as being especially explosive. It's because like you know, that in what stretch of the imagination would emailing an Excel sheet be cost more than it should cost anything, you know, certainly not more than 25 cents a page, but $150, like it was crazy.
So I think an important part here is that while the records that we receive might help answer some lingering questions or help fill in gaps or even give us new questions to ask, like our storytelling goes beyond the records that we're receiving. We need to contextualize them and explain them to our audiences so that way they know how they can use that information or what that information might mean to them. Do we have any more questions for tonight?
I don't know, Carolyn, I'm sorry. At one point I had to check a work email and I could have missed this, but I just had a reporter or Charles, or Tim, I had a reporter telling me that they just got records they requested like 2.5 years ago. Something just absolutely crazy. But really, is there anything we can do about it? Like what, you know, you don't want to really get a lawyer involved.
If I can jump on a soapbox really quick, it's like I've come to believe that, and maybe I'll talk to JD and the press club about this. It's like I think there's easy money out there. I think there's local money, maybe $10,000 to $20,000 that can maybe funnel through the press club, where journalists can just slap an Article 78 together for $500. Press club pays for it and fires it off. If we get, you know, whatever 10,000 divided by 500 is, if the Nassau County Police, if the Nassau County attorney now has to go to court for like 10 or 15 lawsuits, they might start changing how they do business. And so this is, I'm like, I don't have $10,000 and all I have is this like a pro se guide on how to do this. It's like, if we just change our perspective a little bit and lower the bar of what it costs and what we think entry into an Article 78 is, maybe we can start to change how things work. So that's my soapbox, but I'll yield.
Carolyn James, Charles Lane, and Tim Bolger, thanks so much for joining us tonight, and we really appreciate your knowledge and expertise in all things public information requests.